Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're unpacking a really fascinating breakdown from gotquestions.org about one of the absolute most famous passages in biblical literature, Joshua 1:9. You know the one, right? You've probably seen it slapped on a coffee mug or a motivational poster. But today, we're looking way past the surface. We're going to examine the original historical context and step by step build a solid case for how its principles actually apply to modern life. So let's dive right in with the core question the article poses. Does Joshua 1:9 apply to us today? It's a great framing question, honestly, because it asks whether ancient promises made to specific historical figures act as literal guarantees for people living thousands of years later. It's really a question about how we interpret historical texts, and the Got Questions analysis tackles this head-on by exploring the actual nuts and bolts of biblical interpretation. Here is the foundational verse itself. Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. Wow, right? It sounds incredibly universally comforting. But the source makes a really sharp analytical pivot right here. Before applying it to ourselves today, we've got to respect the text enough to examine who this was originally spoken to and what their reality actually looked like. The article draws a stark contrast. Listen, Joshua wasn't just having a tough day at the office. He was stepping up to replace Moses, tasked with leading an entire nation into hostile territory. That is a massive, highly specific historical reality. His big promotion didn't exactly come with a cushy corner office. It came with a literal river to cross and actual enemies to face. We can't just paste ourselves into his situation. So the big question is, how do we bridge this ancient command over to general theological principles for believers today? Bridging promise to principle. The article identifies three core, extractable concepts from that historical narrative that totally transcend time: living strong and courageous, living without fear, and relying on God's presence. Let's break down each one to see exactly how the source justifies their modern application. Principle 1, courage over fear. The Got Questions article argues that, okay, sure, while we aren't crossing the Jordan River to fight ancient armies, the underlying expectation to live courageously remains completely intact. They look straight to the New Testament to prove this, citing Paul's words in 2 Timothy 1:7. The Spirit God gave us does not make us timid, but gives us power, love, and self-discipline. You see, the source of courage connects directly from Joshua right to the modern believer. The piece also points us to Acts 1:8, you will receive power when the Holy Spirit comes on you. Jesus is speaking here, telling his followers they have the power to be witnesses globally. This shows us the call to boldness wasn't just some isolated incident for a single military campaign. No, it's presented as a continuing mandate fueled by divine power rather than just human capability. Principle 2, living without fear. Now, it's one thing to possess courage, right? But it's another entirely to actively push out fear. To illustrate just how far this fearlessness should go, the article highlights Jesus' teachings in Matthew 10:28. Do not be afraid of those who kill the body but cannot kill the soul. Let that sink in. The biblical standard being set here is incredibly high. Trusting God is expected to override even our most basic human fear of physical threats. And this isn't just a theoretical exercise. In Philippians 1:14, we read, dare all the more to proclaim the gospel without fear. Now, remember, the Apostle Paul wrote this while he was literally in chains, imprisoned. Yet his response? To maintain total confidence. The analysis uses Paul as a prime, real-world example of what this fearlessness looks like in action centuries after Joshua lived. But hold on, we need to pause for a really crucial theological distinction here. Fearing God means living in respect and reverence of him while maintaining confidence in his promises and power. So living without fear doesn't mean becoming reckless or losing a sense of awe. Instead, it means eliminating that paralyzing worldly fear by shifting your reverence directly over to God's power. Principle 3, the ultimate guarantee. So what makes this bold lifestyle logically possible, according to the text? Well, the article draws a direct parallel here. Just as God promised to be with Joshua, Jesus makes an identical, parallel promise in the Great Commission, Matthew 28:20. Surely I am with you always to the very end of the age. The geography changed, the mission changed, but the ultimate guarantee of divine presence, that remains exactly the same. To really cement this point, the text brings in Hebrews 13:5. God has said, never will I leave you, never will I forsake you. Here, the writer of Hebrews is actively taking Old Testament promises and applying them directly to a New Testament audience. It totally proves that God's continual presence is the theological engine driving the courage of believers across any era. So, bringing it all together, the circumstance was absolutely specific to Joshua, but the principle of courage and God's presence is universal. Proper textual study starts with a micro view, one man, one nation, one highly specific moment in ancient history, and logically extracts a macro view, finding a timeless theological framework that applies across all generations. So here's a question to leave you with today. How will you apply this timeless principle of courage in your own life? The source makes a really compelling case that texts like Joshua 1:9 aren't meant to just be ancient history. They are intended to be active frameworks for living. The mechanics of courage, fearlessness, and reliance on God's presence, those are tools available to you right now. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep seeking out clear answers, and I'll see you next time.